Shnupad Ashtarashata Shmad Shila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Shila Gurudev Ki Jai Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtarashata Shmad Shila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtarashata Shmad Shila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtarashata Shmad Shila Bhakti Gyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai Nitil Vishtam Vishnupad Ashtarashata Shmad Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitil Vishta Maha-Bhagavat Shila Aksharas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Nitil Vishta Shila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai Nitil Vishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Shila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath Shar Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gopal Shad Vrind Ki Jai Nam Achay Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrind Ki Jai Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Sarva Abhishtavarata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kund Ki Jai Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Dandavat Pranams, Pradyumna Prabhu and Mantaramurti Mataji. Pradyumna Prabhu, I don't know the answer to that question. What's the destination of Deepak Chopra and others? I can't tell you. I have no idea. Dandavat Pranams, Shri Mataji. Haribol. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad Bhakti Vedanta Niti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishe Namaha Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tar Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Yang Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayano Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Taravobhinedu Stang Sarvabhuta Hridayam Munimanatosmi Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Shrinvatang Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridantasta Yabhadrani Vidhunoti Suritsatam Nashta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Tavai Vasmi Na Jivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayamam Charanantikam Bhaktya Vihina Aparada Lakshay Kshiptashtakama Dittaranga Madhe Kripa Maitam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charana Ravindam Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, chapter 29. This is a really long chapter. Tomorrow we'll finish it. But yeah. Talks between Narad and King Prachina-Barhi. So the beginning of the chapter is Narad's elaboration on the allegorical story. On the request of Prachina-Barhi, Narad explained all the different characters. Narad's direct description of material existence. He says, the jiva gets different bodies according to the modes. The jiva is wandering like a dog and cannot escape samsara by material means. Then Narad gives bhakti as a solution. There is no remedy by material means. The only remedy is to surrender to Krishna. Narad ends Prachina-Barhi's performance of rituals. Jnanis and karmis do not know the Lord. And he explains the futility of ritualistic performances. Let's read from this point on. 49. Okay, let's just read this. Karmis do not know the Lord. Despite, let's just start from right here. Let's start from the beginning of this section. Rarity of knowing the Lord. Brahma, Shiva, the Kumaras, many others, and even myself, Narad, are knowledgeable in the Vedas, skillful at speaking them, powerful by austerities, education, and meditation. But even we do not know or see the Lord perfectly after inquiring about him. Note, Jnanis do not know the Lord. This is expressed by Kaimutyanaya. If we do not know the Lord, then what to speak of others? Despite cultivating Vedic knowledge and worshipping the demigods, they cannot understand the Lord. Link, if Jnanis and Karmis do not know the Lord, who does? A devotee knows the Lord by engaging in devotional service. When the Lord shows mercy to him, he gives up all material activities and karma-kandic activities. Karma-kandic activities are also material activities. Anyways. Vedic rituals are never the goal of life, although they may appear to be legitimate goals and pleasing to the ear. Link, then why do my priests and the sages, learned men, make me do karma? They accept the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all, not knowing that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Lord lives. Note, Dhumradhiya indicates that they know Swarga, but not Vaikuntha. Link, then what is the supreme activity? Please tell me. Because of your foolishness, you proudly sacrificed many animals without knowing the supreme activity, which is to please the Supreme Lord. To make one's life auspicious, everyone should take shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the supersoul of all embodied entities, the supreme controller or mother and father of all, and the shelter of all, the result of worshipping the Lord. Because the Lord is the supersoul and friend of everyone, one who is engaged in devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. One who knows the secret is actually educated and can become guru of the world, non-different to Krishna. Link. Prachina-Barhi considered in his mind to send his servants to bring his sons, the Prachetas, to hand over the kingdom to them, and then depart for the forest. Understanding this, Narad Muni then told another story about a deer to make him immediately leave the house, not wait for his sons to come back. Dandavat pranams Indira Mataji. Dandavat pranams Madhavi Didi. And everything's going okay, I'm guessing. How come I can't... Oh, there's my volume. It's on the other side. Wow, they changed the layout. That's interesting. Okay. Allegory of a deer. I answered all your queries. Now hear another story which is very confidential. The deer allegory. A deer is grazing on grass and enjoying with his mate in a garden of flowers that are aromatic. The meaning of this is a man is absorbed in household life in the company of his wife and thinking of sex life. And then his ears are attracted to the songs of swarms. His ears are attracted to the songs of swarms of bumblebees. In the meaning, he enjoys the talks of his wife and children. He moves about without considering the hungry tiger in front of him. And the meaning of this is enjoying in household life. He forgets that time is before him, taking away his lifespan. A hunter is behind him, ready to shoot him with arrows. And the meaning of this is the superintendent of death is trying to kill him from behind. You are like the deer, desiring heavenly planets by fruit of activity. Give up your abominable household life, filled with stories of man and woman, and take shelter of the Lord through the mercy of liberated souls. Further questions by King Prachinabhatishat. My teachers bewilder me. I have heard and considered what you have spoken. It seems my teachers do not know these facts, so I accept you as my guru. You have destroyed my doubts created by these teachers. Now I can see how even great sages with controlled senses can be bewildered. Link, I have no more doubt concerning the path of karma. Please destroy that too. Transfer of karma to the next life. The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. But what is the proof of this? Practically, it is seen that the body that performed the work in his last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? Now, today, this is what we're reading. Narad explains the mind's role in the soul's transmigration. We're reading up to what? Verse 72. Okay, so 12 verses. Reasons for... Okay, let's get to it. Dandavat pranams, whoever is watching on the Gaudiya Kirtan live group. It doesn't say your name for some reason on my computer. Okay. Naraduvacha yenaiva rabhate karma tenaiva mutratat puman bhunkte hyavyavadhanena lingena manasa swayam. The great sage Narad continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. Purports by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity has two kinds of body, the subtle body and the gross body. Actually, he enjoys through the subtle body, which is composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. The gross body is the instrumental outer covering. When the gross body is lost, or when it dies, the root of the gross body, the mind, intelligence, and ego, continues and brings about another gross body. Although the gross bodies apparently change, the real root of the gross body, the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego, is always there. The subtle body's activities, be they pious or impious, create another situation for the living entity to enjoy or suffer in the next gross body. Thus the subtle body continues
whereas the gross bodies change one after another. Since modern scientists and philosophers are too materialistic, and since their knowledge is taken to illusory energy, they cannot explain how the gross body is changing. The materialistic philosopher Darwin has tried to study the changes of the gross body, but because he has no knowledge of either the subtle body or the soul, he could not clearly explain how the evolutionary process is going on. One may change the gross body, but he works in the subtle body. People cannot understand the activities of the subtle body, and consequently, they are bewildered as to how the actions of one gross body affect another gross body. The activities of the subtle body are also guided by the supersoul, as explained in Bhagavad Gita 15:15. Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishto matasmritir jnanam apohanam cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Supersoul is always guiding the individual soul, the individual soul always knows how to act according to the reactions of his past karma. In other words, the Supersoul reminds him to act in such a way. Therefore, although there is apparently a change in the gross body, there is a continuation between the lives of an individual soul. Shayanam imamutsrija swasantam purusho yata karmatmanya hitam bhunkte tadrishene tarenava. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. Never hear so much about the animals on the heavenly planets. Purport. Although the roots of distress and happiness is the mind, intelligence, and ego, a gross body is still required as an instrument for enjoyment. The gross body may change, but the subtle body continues to act. Unless the living entity gets another gross body, he will have to continue in a subtle body, or a ghostly body. One becomes a ghost when the subtle body acts without the help of the instrumental gross body. As stated in this verse, Shayanam imam utsrija shwasantam. The gross body may lie on a bed and rest, and even though the machinery of the gross body is working, the living entity may leave, go into a dream, and return to the gross body. When he returns to the body, he forgets his dream. Similarly, when the living entity takes on another gross body, he forgets the present gross body. The conclusion is that the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and ego, creates an atmosphere with desires and ambitions that the living entity enjoys in the subtle body. Actually, the living entity is in the subtle body, even though the gross body apparently changes, and even though he inhabits the gross body on various planets. All the activities performed by the living entity in the subtle body are called illusory, because they are not permanent. Liberation means getting out of the clutches of the subtle body. Liberation from the gross body simply involves the transmigration of the soul from one gross body to another. When the mind is educated in Krishna consciousness or in higher consciousness in the mode of goodness, one is transferred either to the upper heavenly planets or to the spiritual worlds, the Vaikuntha planets. One therefore has to change his consciousness by cultivating knowledge received from Vedic instructions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the disciplic succession. If we train the subtle body in this life by always thinking about Krishna, we will transfer to Krishna Loka after leaving the gross body. This is confirmed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Janma karma chame devyam evam yo veti tattvata taktva deham punar janma naiti mam eti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Thus the change of the gross body is not very important. but the change of the subtle body is important. The Krishna consciousness movement is educating people to enlighten the subtle body. The perfect example in this regard is Ambarish Maharaj, who always engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayo. Similarly, in this life, we should always fix our mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, who is present in his Archa Vigraha, the incarnation of the deity of the temple. We should always engage in his worship. We should also always engage in his worship. If we engage our speech in describing the activities of the Lord, and our ears in hearing about his pastimes, and if we follow the regulative principles to keep the mind intact for advancing in Krishna consciousness, we shall certainly be elevated to the spiritual platform. Then, at the time of death, the mind, intelligence, and ego will no longer be materially contaminated. The living entity is present, and the mind, intelligence, and ego are also present. When the mind, intelligence, and ego are purified, all the active senses of the living entity become spiritual. Thus, the living entity attains his Satchidananda form. The Supreme Lord is always in his Satchidananda form, but the living entity, although part and parcel of the Lord, becomes materially contaminated when he desires to come to the material world for material enjoyment. The prescription for returning home back to Godhead is given by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita 9:34. Manmana bhavamar bhakta madhyaji mam namaskaro mame vaishyasi yuktvaivam atmanam matparayana. Always think of me and become my devotee. Worship me and offer your homage unto me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. Mamaite manasayaryad asavaham iti bruvan griniyat tatpuman radham karmayena punarbhava. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that. My duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Purport. As long as one is absorbed in the bodily conception, his activities are performed on that platform. This is not very difficult to understand. In the world, we see that every nation is trying to supersede every other nation, and that every man is trying to advance beyond his fellow man. All these activities are going on under the name of advancement of civilization. There are many plans for making the body comfortable, and these plans are carried out in the subtle body after the destruction of the gross body. It is not a fact that after the gross body is destroyed, the living entity is finished. Although many great philosophers and teachers in this world are under the impression that after the body is finished, everything is finished, this is not a fact. Narad Muni says in this verse that at death, one takes his plans with him, griniyat. And to execute these plans, he gets another body. This is called punarbhava. When the gross body is finished, the plans of the living entity are taken by the mind, and by the grace of the Lord, the living entity gets a chance to give these plans shape in the next life. This is known as the law of karma. As long as the mind is absorbed in the laws of karma, a certain type of body must be accepted in the next life. Karma is the aggregate of fruitive activities conducted to make this body comfortable or uncomfortable. We have already seen that when a man was about to die, he requested his physician to give him a chance to live for 4 more years so that he could finish all his plans. This means that while dying, he was thinking of his plans. After his body was destroyed, he doubtlessly carried his plans with him by means of the subtle body composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. Thus, he would get another chance by the grace of the Supreme Lord, the Supersoul, who is always within his heart. Sarvasya chaham hridisannavishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam cha. That's Bhagavad Gita 15:15. In the next birth, In the next birth, one acquires remembrance from the Supersoul and begins to execute the plans begun in the previous life. This is also explained in Bhagavad Gita in another verse. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hridesherjuna tishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated on a machine. Who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Bhagavad Gita 1861. Situated on a vehicle given by material nature and reminded by the Supersoul within the heart, the living entity struggles all over the universe to fulfill his plans, thinking, I am a Brahman, I am a Kshatriya, I am an American, I am an Indian, and so on. All these designations are of the same essence. There is no point in becoming a Brahmin in preference to an American, or becoming an American in preference to a Negro. After all, these are all bodily conceptions under the modes of material nature. Is Negro considered an offensive term? Anyways, in preference to an African American. Anyhow. Yatanumiyate chittam upayar. Wait, I didn't mean to say African American. Just, whatever. Yatanumiyate chittam upayar indriye hita evam prag tehajam karma lakshate chitta vrittivi. One can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses, the knowledge-acquiring senses and the executive senses, or executive. Executive. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. Purport. There is an English proverb that says, the face is the index of the mind. If one is angry, his anger is immediately expressed in his face. Similarly, other mental states are reflected by the actions of the gross body. In other words, the activities of the gross body are reactions of the mental condition. The mind's activities are thinking, feeling, and willing. The willing portion of the mind is manifest by the activities of the body. The conclusion is that by the activities of the body and senses, we can understand the condition of the mind. The condition of the mind is affected by past activities in the past body. When the mind is joined with a particular sense, it immediately becomes manifest in a certain way. For instance, when there is anger in the mind, the tongue vibrates so many maledictions. Similarly, when the mind's anger is expressed through the hands, there is fighting. When it is expressed through the leg, there is kicking. There are so many ways in which the subtle activities of the mind are expressed through the various senses. The mind of a person in Krishna consciousness also acts in a similar way. The tongue chants Hare Krishna, the Mahamantra. The hands are raised in ecstasy, and the legs dance in Krishna consciousness. These symptoms are technically called Ashtasattvic Vikar. Ashtasattvic Vikar is transformation of the mental condition in goodness, or sometimes transcendental ecstasy. I turned on noise suppression, so you probably can't hear the rain outside, but all my clothes that I just washed that I washed yesterday are getting completely soaked. Anyhow. Nanabhutam kvachanena dehana drishtamashritam kadachir upalabheta yadrupam yadrigatmani. Also, just letting you know, the power might go out, since lots of times when it rains really hard, the power goes. So, just letting you know. Translation. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. Purport. In dreams, we sometimes see things that we have never experienced in the present body. Sometimes in dreams, we think that we are flying in the sky, although we have no experience of flying. This means that once in a previous life, either as a demigod or astronaut, we flew in the sky. The impression is there in the stockpile of the mind, and it suddenly expresses itself. It is like fermentation taking place in the depths of the water, which sometimes manifests itself in bubbles on the water's surface. Sometimes we dream of coming to a place we have never known or experienced in this lifetime, but this is proof that in a past life we experienced this. The impression is kept within the mind and sometimes becomes manifest either in a dream or in a thought. The conclusion is that the mind is a storehouse of various thoughts and experience undergone during our past lives. Thus there is a chain of continuation from one life to another, from previous lives to this life, and from this life to future lives. This is also sometimes proved by saying that a man is a born poet, a born scientist, or a born devotee. If, like Maharaj Ambarish, we think of Krishna constantly in this life, Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo, we will certainly be transferred to the kingdom of God at the time of death. Even if our attempt to be Krishna conscious is not complete, our Krishna consciousness will continue in the next life. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 6:41. Prapya punya kritam lokan ushitva shashvati sama shuchinam shrimatam gehe yoga brashto bijayate. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. Right. If we rigidly follow the principles of meditation on Krishna, there is no doubt that in our next life we will be transferred to Krishna Loka, the Loka Vrindavan. Let me just check to make sure the internet's still going. Looks like it. Looks like it's going good. Do I have noise suppression on? Just making sure. Oh, I don't. Here. This shall take out the rain noise. Tenasya tadrisham raja lingina deha sambhavam Shraddha swananubhutorto namanas prashtamarhati. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. Purport. Srila Prabhupada's used this verse from Prem Vivarta so many times now. Krishna bahir mukha hoya bhogavancha kore nikatastha maya tare jhapatiya dhare. Actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. When a living entity wants to imitate him, he is given a chance to satisfy his false desire to lord it over material nature. That is the beginning of his downfall. As long as he is within this material atmosphere, he is a subtle vehicle in the form of the mind, which is the stockpile of all kinds of material desires. Such desires become manifest in different bodily forms. Srila Narad Muni requests the king to accept this fact from him because Narad is an authority. The conclusion is that the mind is a storehouse of our past desires, and we have this present body due to our past desires. Similarly, whatever we desire in this present body will be expressed in a future body. Thus the mind is a source of different kinds of bodies. If the mind is purified by Krishna consciousness, one will naturally, in the future, get a body that is spiritual and full of Krishna consciousness. Such a body is our original form, as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirms. Jiver Swarupa Hoy, Krishner Nitya Das. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 20:108. Every living entity is constitutionally an eternal servant of Krishna. If a person is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, he is to be considered a liberated soul even in this life. This is confirmed by Srila Rupa Goswami. Iha yasya harer dase karmana manasa gira nikila swapyavastasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. Oh my God, I'm even feeling the rain right now, even though I'm sitting far away from my window. Whatever. One who engages in the transcendental service of the Lord in body, mind, and words is to be considered liberated in all conditions of material existence. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.187. The Krishna consciousness movement is based on this principle. We must teach people to absorb themselves always in the service of the Lord, because that position is their natural position. One who is always serving the Lord is to be considered already liberated. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who always engages in the spiritual activities of unalloyed devotional service at once transcends the modes of material nature and is elevated to the spiritual platform. The devotee is therefore above the three modes of material nature and is even transcendental to the Brahman platform. A Brahman may be infected by the two baser modes, namely Rajagun and Tamagun. A pure devotee, who is free from all material desires experienced on the mental platform and who is also free from empiric philosophical speculation or fruitive activity, is always above material conditioning and is always liberated. Mana eva manushasya purvarupani samshati bhavishyatas chabhadrante tataiva na bhavishyata. O King, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus the mind indicates the past and future bodies. Purport. The mind is the index of information about one's past and future lives. If a man is a devotee of the Lord, he cultivated devotional service in his previous life. Similarly, if one's mind is criminal, he was a criminal in his last life. In the same way, according to the mind, we can understand what will happen in the future life. In Bhagavad Gita 14.18, it is said, Urdvam gachanti sattvasta madhye tishtanti rajasa Jaganya guna vrittista ado gachanti tamasa. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. If a person is in the mode of goodness, his mental activities will promote him to a higher planetary system. Similarly, if he has a low mentality, his future life will be most abominable. The lives of the living entity in both the past and the future are indicated by the mental condition. Narad Muni is herein offering the king blessings of all good fortune so that the king will not desire anything or make plans for sense gratification. The king was engaged in fruitive ritualistic ceremonies because he hopes to get a better life in the future. Narad Muni desired him to give up all mental concoctions. As explained before, all bodies in heavenly planets and hellish planets arise from mental concoctions, and the sufferings and enjoyments of material life are simply on the mental platform. They take place on the chariots of the mind, Manoratha. It is therefore said, Yasyasti bhakter bhagavata kinchana sarvar gunastatra samasate sura harava bhaktasya kuto maharguna mano ratena sati bhavato bahi. One who has unflinching devotion for the personality of Godhead has all the good qualities of the demigods. But one who is not a devotee of the Lord has only material qualifications that are of little value. This is because he is hovering on the mental plane and is certain to be attracted by the glaring material energy. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 5:18-12. Unless one becomes a devotee of the Lord or becomes fully Krishna conscious, he will certainly hover on the mental platform and be promoted and degraded in different types of bodies. All qualities that are considered good according to the material estimation actually have no value, because these so-called good qualities will not save a person from the cycle of birth and death. The conclusion is that one should not be without mental desire. Anya vilashita shunyam jnana karma dhanavritam. One should be fully freed from material desires, philosophical speculation, and fruitive activity. The best course for a human being is to favorably accept the transcendental devotional service of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of human life. Adrishta ashrutam chatra kvachin manasi drishyate yata tatanu mantavyam deshakala triyashrayam. Sometimes in a dream, we see something never experienced or heard of in this life. But all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. Purport. In the previous verse, it was explained that in dreams we see that which was experienced during the day. But why is it that we sometimes in our dreams see what we have never heard of or seen at the time during this life? That we've never heard of or seen at any time during this life? Here it is stated that even though such events may not be experienced in this life, they were experienced in previous lives. According to time and circumstance, they combine so that in dreams we see something wonderful that we have never experienced. For instance, we may see an ocean on the peak of a mountain, or we may see that the ocean has dried up. These are simply combinations of different experiences in time and space. Sometimes we may see a golden mountain, and this is due to our having experienced gold and mountains separately. In the dream, under illusion, we combine these separate factors. In this way, we are able to see golden mountains, or stars during the day. The conclusion is that these are all mental concoctions, although they have actually been experienced in different circumstances. They have simply combined together in a dream. This fact is further explained in the following verse. Sarve kramanurodena manasindriya gochara ayanti bahusho yanti sarve sammanaso jana. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the minds, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. Purport. The activities of the living entity in the body of a dog may be experienced in the mind of a different body. Therefore, those activities appear never to have been heard or seen. The mind continues, although the body changes. Even in this lifespan, we can sometimes experience dreams of our childhood. Although such incidents now appear strange, it is to be understood that they are recorded in the mind. Because of this, they become visible in dreams. The transmigration of the soul is caused by the subtle body, which is the storehouse of all kinds of material desires. Unless one is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, material desires will come and go. That is the nature of the minds: thinking, feeling, and willing. As long as the mind is not engaged in meditation on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, the mind will desire so many material enjoyments. Sensual images are recorded in the mind in chronological order, and they become manifest one after another. Therefore, the living entity has to accept one body after another. The mind plans material enjoyment, and the gross body serves as the instrument to realize such desires and plans. The mind is the platform onto which all desires come and go. Srila Narottam Das Thakur therefore sings, Guru Mukha Parma Vakya, Chittete Koriya Aikya, Ar Na Koriho Mane Asha. Narottam Das Thakur advises everyone to stick to the principle of carrying out the orders of the spiritual master. One should not desire anything else. If the regulative principles ordered by the spiritual master are followed rigidly, the mind will gradually be trained to desire nothing but the service of Krishna. Such training is the perfection of life. Satvaika nishte manasi bhagavat parshvavartini tamas chandra masi vedam uparajya vabhasate. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a mental state that the devotee can observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible, but it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, which is observed in the presence of the full moon. Purport. It has been explained in the previous verse that all desires in the mental platform become visible one after another. Sometimes, however, by the supreme will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the whole stockpile can be visible all at one time. In Brahma Samhita 554, it is said, Karmani nirtadahati kintu cha bhakti bhajam. When a person is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, his stockpile of material desires is minimized. Indeed, the desires no longer fructify in the form of gross bodies. Instead, the stockpile of desires becomes visible on the mental platform by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this connection, the darkness occurring before the full moon, the lunar eclipse, can be explained as being another planet known as Rahu. According to Vedic astronomy, the Rahu planet, which is not visible, is accepted. Sometimes the Rahu planet is visible in the presence of the full moonlight. It then appears that this Rahu planet exists somewhere near the orbit of the moon. The failure of modern moon excursionists may be due to the Rahu planet. In other words, those who are supposed to be going to the moon may actually be going to this invisible planet, Rahu. Actually, they are not going to the moon, but to the planet of Rahu, and after reaching this planet, they come back. Apart from this discussion, the point is that a living entity has immense and unlimited desires for material enjoyment, and he has to transmigrate from one gross body to another until these desires are exhausted. Oops, my mic's quite far away from my face. Let me move it up. No living entity is free from the cycle of birth and death unless he takes to Krishna consciousness. Therefore, in this verse, it is clearly stated, Satvaika nishte, that when one is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, in one stroke he is freed of past and future mental desires. Then, by the grace of the Supreme Lord, everything becomes simultaneously manifest within the mind. In this regard, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur cites the example of Mother Yashoda's seeking the whole cosmic manifestation within the mouth of Lord Krishna. By the grace of Lord Krishna, Mother Yashoda saw all the universes and planets within the mouth of Krishna. Similarly, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, a Krishna-conscious person can see all his dormant desires at one time and finish all his future transmigrations. This facility is especially given to the devotee to make his path clear for returning home back to Godhead. Why we see things not experienced in this life is explained herein. That which we see in the future expression of a gross body or is already stocked in our mental stockpile. That which we see is the future expression of a gross body or is already stocked in our mental stockpile. Because a Krishna conscious person does not have to accept a future gross body, his recorded desires are fulfilled in a dream. We therefore sometimes find things in a dream never experienced in our present life. Okay, now 3 more verses. Nahamameti bhavoyam purushe vyavadhiyate yavad buddhi manoksharta guna vyuha yanadiman. As long as there exists the subtle material body composed of intelligence, mind, senses, and sense objects, and the reactions of the material qualities, the consciousness of false identification and its relative objective, the gross body, exists as well. Purport. The desires in the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego cannot be fulfilled without a gross body composed of the material elements earth, water, air, fire, and ether. When the gross material body is not manifest, the living entity cannot factually act in the modes of material nature. In this verse, it is clearly explained that the subtle activities of the mind and intelligence continue due to the sufferings and enjoyments of the living entity's subtle body. The consciousness of material identification, such as I and mine, still continues because such consciousness has been extant from time immemorial. Does extant mean existing? Still in existence, surviving, yes. However, when one transfers to the spiritual world by virtue of understanding Krishna consciousness, the actions and reactions of both gross and subtle bodies no longer bother the spirit soul. Supti murcho patapeshu pranayana vikhatata nehate ham iti jnanam mrityu prajvarayorapi. When the living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there is some great shock on account of severe loss, at the time of death, or when the body temperature is very high, the movement of the life air is arrested. At that time, the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the self. Purport. Foolish people deny the existence of the soul. But it is a fact that when we sleep, we forget the identity of the material body, and when we awake, we forget the identity of the subtle body. In other words, while sleeping, we forget the activities of the gross body, and when active in the gross body, we forget the activities of sleeping. Actually, both states, sleeping and waking, are creations of the illusory energy. The living entity actually has no connection with either the activities of sleep or the activities of the so-called awakened state. When a person is in deep sleep or when he has fainted, he forgets his gross body. Similarly, under the chloroform of some other anesthetic, the living entity forgets his gross body and does not feel pain or pleasure during a surgical operation. Similarly, when a man is suddenly shocked by some great loss, he forgets his identification with the gross body. At the time of death, when the temperature of the body rises to 107 degrees, the living entity falls into a coma and is unable to identify his gross body. In such cases, the life air that moves within the body is choked up, and the living entity forgets his identification with the gross body. Because of our ignorance of the spiritual body, of which we have no experience, we do not know of the activities of the spiritual body, and in ignorance, we jump from one false platform to another. We sometimes act in relation to the gross body, and sometimes in relation to the subtle body. If, by Krishna's grace, we act in our spiritual body, we can transcend both the gross and subtle bodies. In other words, we can gradually train ourselves to act in terms of the spiritual body. As stated in the Narad Pancharatra, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktir Uchate. Devotional service means engaging the spiritual body and spiritual senses in the service of the Lord. When we are engaged in such activities, the actions and reactions of the gross and subtle bodies cease. Okay, this is the last verse. For today. Garbe balye praposhkalyad ekadasha vidang tada lingam na drishyate yuna. Oops. Sorry. Kuvam chandra maso yata. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses in the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. Purport. When the living entity is within the womb, his gross body, the 10 sense organs, and the mind are not fully developed. At such a time, the objects of the senses do not disturb him. In a dream, a young man may experience the presence of a young woman, because at that time, the senses are active. Because of undeveloped senses, a child or boy will not see a young woman in his dreams. The senses are active in youth, even when one dreams. And although there may be no young woman present, the senses may act and there may be seminal discharge, nocturnal emission. The activities of the subtle and gross bodies depend on how developed conditions are. The example of the moon is very appropriate. On a dark moon night, the full shining moon is still present, but it appears not to be present due to conditions. Similarly, the senses of the living entity are there, but they only become active when the gross body and the subtle body are developed. Unless the senses of the gross body are developed, they will not act on the subtle body. Similarly, because of the absence of desires in the subtle body, there may be no development in the gross body. So tomorrow we will read Inactive senses do not indicate a liberated state. Definition of the subtle body. Transmigration of the soul. A caterpillar does not give up one leaf. How's the mind the cause of samsara? And then the renunciation of King Prachinabarhishat and the false Shruti, the results we get from hearing this pastime. We'll finish this chapter tomorrow, and we'll read all that. And then I think chapter 30 is the last chapter of the 4th canto. Right? Or is it 31 chapters? Oh, it's 31. Okay. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gantavika Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai. Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashma Chila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj Shila Gurudevi Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashma Shila Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashma Shila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashma Shila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashma Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Mahabhagavat Shila Bhakshivas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Shila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Shila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jeev Gopal Padadas Raghunath, Shara Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namachay Shri Hairas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund Ki Jai. Shri Yamuna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Dandavat Pranams Vrindayi Tosudevaya Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Sattvatai Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyashta Kripa Sindhu Bhyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat Pranams. Dandavat Pranams. Prajumna Prabhu, Mantramurti Mataji, Indira Mataji, Gargaraj Ji, everybody, Haribo, Madhavi Didi, Raseshwari Mataji, everybody, Haribo. Present.